What's going on, everybody?
You can do other things and you can explore different aspects of yourself and you can become a different person.
You can't use your voice, lift someone else's voice up.
Understand that you are a global citizen and you do have a responsibility.
Welcome back to Life Outside the Box. I'm Abigail Kurnia, joined by my co-host Asante and a very, very special guest that I am very excited for everyone to listen to today. Jeff Perera, community advocate, community builder, overall very, very inspirational speaker. And we talk today about everything from flexing your emotional muscle, how to build and learn and unlearn everything from masculinity, socializing gender norms, and just being better than your yesterdays. Stay tuned. This is a good one. This is a conversation I think is very, very timely in today's online media world. And very excited for everyone to stay tuned and listen to this. And as always, thank you for Kamiko for sponsoring today's video. I'll give him the floor and I'll let him introduce himself. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you. My name is Jeff Perera, pronounce he, him. I'm very thankful since 2008. I've been doing work talking to people of all genders, but really talking to men and young men and boys about our ideas of what it means to be a man, how men can help end gender-based violence. And as I describe it, moving from harmful to helpful ideas of manhood, where we work, live, worship, study, hang out, and play. So yeah, I'm just very thankful to do this work across Turtle Island, North America. And that looks like talks, trainings, lectures, facilitating conversations, creating content online on my website, Higher Unlearning. It's a space to kind of explore how these issues of our ideas of masculinity impact us in everyday life. So yeah, just very thankful to be here with you all. Appreciate you and the work that you both do and the extended team. Yeah.
Dope, man. We're very happy to have you here for this conversation today. I think it's gonna be a really good one. Just to like start off, for me, I have a lot of questions, but what motivated you to get into this kind of work?
Yeah. So the way I'll explain it by telling a story. So I was a kid. I'm in the back seat of my car, and my mom's in the front seat, what we call the shotgun seat, right? And we're parked in a shopping mall, parking lot somewhere in Toronto. And my father's outside the car, and he's arguing with a drunk white guy. And it's not physical, but they are verbally being aggressive towards each other and yelling. I can't hear what they're saying. I don't really remember at this point. But at one point, my father gets back into the car, slams the door behind him, and puts his hands on the steering wheel. And he's shaking in a rage. And the drunk white dude is outside, banging on the window, yelling at racial slurs at him, telling him to come out, get outside here. And, you know, children are navigating experiences that grown adults are also trying to figure out, right? They might not have the language or understand, but they're experiencing it. And so they have to catch up in a lot of ways, right, to the realities of our world. And so I was used to seeing my father tremble in rage at home because some of my earliest experiences and memories are of my father being physically violent towards my mom. I would see her covered in bruises at the hands of my father. And, but what I was realizing was that in this moment, here was a man, a peer, some of a similar, like my father wasn't a very strong person. He was an immigrant from Sri Lanka who moved to England with his wife, and then came here and experienced racism, had an accent. This is over 50 years ago, right, when they arrived here, and had trouble coping, and he had trouble kind of figuring out what it means to be a Canadian man, right? So the way he kind of compensated for feeling small is going home and taking it out on his wife. But in this moment, here he is with this physical equivalent, right? And I realized that, my dad's not trembling because he's angry. He's trembling because he's afraid. Here's this guy who was Godzilla at home, but here he's a different person. Just in that moment, I remember my mom cracking open the window of the car. Back then, you have to roll the windows. And she's like, "Get out of here, leave us alone." And I think the drunk dude realized, oh, there's a wife and kid in the car. And I remember his face kind of startled, and he stumbled off. And throughout my growing up from a child to a teen and a young man, I got tuned into the reality of girls and young women and women as I got older through middle school and high school, etc., and eventually tuned into the reality of gender expansive, non-conforming people as well. But the question that stayed with me was, at first it was, why is my dad like this? Like, what's wrong with my father? And then that extended to young men I knew in my life. I grew up in a community here in Toronto called Jane and Finch. It's a neighborhood where people from all around the world come, newcomers, refugees, immigrants come and had established and moved there. So I got to know kids growing up from Jamaica, from Brazil, from Italy, from everywhere, right? Literally everywhere. And when I'd hang out with these guys one on one, it'd be different than when we were with a group of boys or a group of girls. Their energy was different. And I was someone who very much was into typical boy violent TV shows and whatever, but I pushed back against these ideas of manhood that were around violence and harm. And so that personal journey of trying to figure out why we're like this led to a professional one as I got older. And for me, it's because I'm invested in men and young men, and I love men and young men and boys. It's not that I'm on team women and trans folks, gender expansive folks at the expense of guys. I also love and am invested in men. That was a journey to get to that place for me. But I am invested in our lives as young men and boys, and that is the work that I do. Like, it's caring about everybody and the work we need to do as guys to recognize our wounds and heal our wounds so that our wounds don't become emotional wounds that end up wounding other people and harming other people. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of like what got me into the journey, the work that I'm doing.
I mean, what really struck out with me in that story is, picturing young you in the back of the car and seeing these big emotions on, the male figure in your life and trying to understand what are these emotions, like you said, like what's wrong with dad, like what's wrong with him. I'm curious for our visual listeners, could you explain your background?
Yes, so this is I'll try to get out of the way, but for folks, you can just Google it really quickly. The Gothman Institute has what they call the feelings wheel. It was created by someone else. I can't remember the name, but they've created this version of it. And it's basically helps us kind of, when you say you're feeling something, what does that mean? Because when someone says they're angry, it's kind of like an iceberg. On the surface, you can say, I'm angry, but underneath, what does that mean? And you dive into, is it disappointment? Is it fear? Is it shame? Is it guilt? And then dig even further. What does that mean for me? So the wheel helps. It's a great tool to kind of help, whether it's educators, parents, or individuals for themselves, figuring out, when someone says, I feel a certain way, I feel a type of way, well, what does that mean? Right? I like to dig into it, dive into it. And one of the things that we can do is name what you feel and then deal, like recognize what you're feeling and then deal with the emotion. I think we'll talk about it more later, but for me, I talk about how emotions are data, right? Emotions are like notifications on your phone, you know. And really what it's like is like, if you, for those of you who have a phone, like, which is most of us now, right? Like, when you get a ping on your phone, you rush to check out what it is. And some of us have all the notifications turned on. We want to know everything, fear of missing out. You want to know all the things. And some people silence everything at a certain moment, or maybe all the time. Silence incoming calls, silence emails, silence whatever, social media notifications, right? And those are extremes of the spectrum. But if you think of like how we get pings on our phone in everyday moments, you're getting like emotional pings, right? You're feeling an emotion and you get a ping, sad, anxious, scared, happy, right? It's a ping, and it's data telling you something. So you can either turn that off or you can turn it on. You can either hyper fixate on it or completely ignore it. But the idea, I think, is finding a sweet spot to be able to name, okay, this is what I'm feeling, this is why I'm feeling it, and this is how I'm feeling it, and then you can work on that. You don't have to do it right in that moment, but maybe take a mental note to think about, I want to step back and look at that. Or this seems to be something that comes up whenever I'm with this person or whenever I'm in this situation. So it's just really helpful to kind of think of it that way, that, obviously people, especially these days, are thinking about protecting your peace. And I don't want to be, bombarded with everything that's going on. We need to try to figure out that sweet spot of self-care and being mindful of what's happening around us, but not letting it overwhelm us. But the overwhelm is really more around kind of the feeling that I don't know what to do about what's happening, right? It's, mental health isn't about avoiding hard things. It's not about turning your notifications off 24 hours a day, right? Like, you have to name what you feel and deal. And knowing that I can name what I'm feeling, I can feel it and I can deal with it. Just knowing that I can do that is really helpful to kind of navigate everyday life, because you're feeling an emotion in every moment. Like, guys will tend to say, "Oh, he's feeling so emotional," or he's caught up in his emotions or whatever. If he starts to cry, "I'm feeling really emotional right now." But it's like, we're feeling emotional 24 hours a day. You're always in some state of emotion. It's just naming what it is and being okay with it and working with it, working through it. So yeah.
No, I've been into this emotion wheel stuff for a minute now. Also doing a little bit of work with youngsters. What is your experience in working with young people, boys in particular, in trying to communicate the importance of this level of emotional literacy? And do you ever get resistance? Or is it not resistance? Like, what is it like?
Yeah, it's like the way I try to break it down when I'm talking about it. We talk about emotional literacy. I describe it like emotional muscle, right? The muscle that we would flex, and that's in everyday situations, right? So if you think of when you're born, you're read or labeled a certain gender, right? You're male, female, man, woman, masculine, feminine. So you're, according to your sex, you're a girl or a boy, and you're raised that way, right? You're socialized that way. So the way we raise young girls typically around the world, more or less, is like, we'll give them a baby doll, or we'll give them, like, a cook set, or sand castles or whatever. But the tools are usually, we're giving young girls are tools of nurturance. So they learn how to take care of others before they even take care of themselves, right? So they're learning how to take care of other people. But what they're learning is how to nurture relationships, right? So that is like an emotional muscle they've started to build from elementary school, right? And then that goes into their preteens and their teens, and they develop the ability to navigate relationships, and their emotional muscle builds and builds. So by the time they're 20, they're emotionally jacked, right? Now we can argue and debate like the kind of relationships women have with each other and young girls, and how intense they can get. But the reality is that they are tuned into and are emotionally literate. So the way I described is they're emotionally muscular, right? Young boys, on the other hand, will give them teddy bears at first, but at some point you take away the teddy bear and you replace it. Back in my days, you replace it with a war doll, like a GI Joe. But now it's more like war games, video games. And at some point, whether we mean it or not, we kind of snip that emotional muscle, or it becomes atrophied. The young boy is no longer smiling in the photos. They've got to have like a mean mugging, serious face, They don't want to be hugging up and kissing anybody or whatever. And that emotional muscle starts to stagnate, and that muscle is either atrophied or snipped. So now, for young boys, they reach a certain point. It's almost like you can see this switch in the grades that they're in. When I'm talking to young elementary school students, that all of a sudden they exhibit things like disconnecting, tuning out, and we talk about issues of isolation for boys and young men, and really men across the board. These days is a big issue. So it definitely shows up for them. So when we're talking about issues, it's important, and the language I use might be different with young boys and young kids, but it's still the same issue. And they're hungry to talk about it. They want to talk about it, but it's feeling the permission that you can go there and talk about it. And it's talking to them about what they're feeling, making them feel engaged and like we're talking about you and it's safe, it's okay. Because no matter whether you're 10 or if you're 50, these conversations do feel like a threat, right? Vulnerability feels like a threat. It feels threatening for guys because we're taught that being vulnerable means being weak, being soft. So the idea is like to say, no, it's like this is like building our emotional muscle, right? And it's talking about our strength and vulnerability. um we can look at it like taking risk, like taking an emotional risk or a physical risk, but really vulnerability and strength go hand in hand. They're like partners. Like you can't develop strength without getting vulnerable. Just like with your physical muscle, you have to build your physical muscle, you have to build your emotional muscle, and that means taking the risk of, with physical muscle, working out, pushing yourself. And emotionally, it's the same way. It's building that emotional muscle by talking about things, about facing things, about working through what you're feeling. And again, the concept with young kids is different as they get older and older, right? And it gets a bit deeper. But yeah, you definitely see it, how they can kind of easily tune out. They might joke and fool around to kind of dismiss what's happening or to not take it seriously because it's real uncomfort they're feeling. I'm feeling uncomfortable around this. And it's not a familiar space. When they're young women in this space and girls, you can see right away they want to talk about it, they're plugged in. It's because they feel a permission, like they feel like I have permission to do this. It's not going to be a threat of my femininity, of my being accepted, right? Whereas young boys feel like it's a threat. I have to protect my manhood, even at that early age. And I think we can relate to that, in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's really interesting to see it because it's very evident at a certain point with children as they start to get older and socialize in our society.
I really want to talk about what you just said there, children socializing in our society. And
Yeah.
I've watched the TED Talk that you've done, and I'm putting a pin in that because I am going to come back to that.
Okay.
Um, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. We're talking a lot about language and socialization and the split in how boys and girls are socialized growing up. There's an author that I'm really fond of named Ocean Vuong,
Mm.
and yeah,
Hmm.
Ocean Vuong, there's an interview he does, and he talks about how the English language almost primes men for violence. Talking about even the phrases we use every day, you're a killer, you killed that, you smashed it. How does that affect young boys and even girls to that effect? But, with your work with young children, like going to schools and talking to them about, what does it mean to be a boy and what does it mean to be a man? Like, have you seen how language affects that?
Yeah, like uh, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I don't want to mess up the quote, but he once said, language does not just describe reality, it creates the reality it describes, you know? And yes, people of all genders use phrases like, you killed it, you smashed that, I'm going to kill it, you ate that up, whatever. But I think it's acknowledging that it's different, right? That when for young girls, they navigate issues of doubt, of self esteem, of feeling worthy. Absolutely, they do. But for boys and young men and men, any kind of rejection feels like a complete rejection of them as a human being because their entire identity, their worth, their value is tied to demonstrating and holding power. And that can look like being the funny guy, being the tough guy. Everyone's afraid of me. People want to be with me or be like me. So it's really an idea of like your value, your worth is tied to domination, right? What can you demonstrate? What do you own? What do you produce? So even at an early age, it's like, again, you can see that switch flip where young boys is all of a sudden really about the muscles they have, their clothes, their status amongst their peers. And again, it's so important to say that this is true of people of any gender, right? Young girls' status is so important and it's identified in different ways. But there is something where, when young girls feel that they are not valued or devalued, it doesn't translate into destruction. There are obviously young girls and women who are violent and have been violent. And to the extremes, we think of, when I say violent, people extremely, they think automatically the extreme mass murderer, killer. right? And there are young girls and women, folks who've done that. But by and large, overwhelmingly, the data tells us that when it comes to resolving issues through violence, young men and boys are fluent in the language of violence. Not all young men and boys, right? We're not talking about absolutes here, but the reality is more often than not. And that's not to shame anybody. It's to say, let's name it and let's deal with it. Why is it that way? And what can we do differently about it? So things start with language. It starts with, you know, when young boys think of like, I need to dominate, I need to be in control, who can I hold power over? And that starts with their language, right? So, especially right now, there is a real issue around homophobia, transphobia, racism. A lot of young kids wanting to say the N word or homophobic slurs, being transphobic, ways of like chopping people down to make themselves feel better. So at the expense of women and young girls, of trans folks, people of color, if you're white, and it's not even just white folks. Like it's also racialized young men are also doing that as far as you know diving into racism. I mean, you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. That's a hard truth to hear, but we're seeing it all the time. I mean, you see Kanye West wearing a black Klansman outfit and yelling, Heil Hitler on a song. And that's not an isolated feeling. That's reflecting a shift with young men of color, where these are terms and phrases that you can feel powerful by saying it. Like I can just agitate, I can be rebellious. Back in the day, rebellious culture was something different. It was like punk or hip hop culture was fighting the establishment. Now it's kind of flipped, and being a rebel is saying the N word or being racist or being all these things, right? So you're definitely seeing it with young people. Um, and that disconnect is part of it, like disconnect from our own humanity. There's a huge empathy deficit, I think, amongst society. There's a huge deficit in empathy. And I think another phrase I use is I describe it as a trust famine. People don't trust institutions or organizations or other groups and communities. So we can hold power by chopping down other people or stomping on other people emotionally, and that starts with language. And the biggest, I mean, sexism, misogyny, that's the biggest tool for young guys. Like homophobia and transphobia is rooted in violence against women. When a man doesn't look or act a certain way, or a woman doesn't know her role, she's acting, a woman's being smart or tough or assertive or in control, she needs to know her role. And if a man's being expressing emotional literacy, they feminize him by calling him, the words, right? Bitch, or even worse, right? So these become weaponized words and they mean something. Even if you don't know what you're actually saying, like when kids use the racial slur, the F word, I just, that's just what we say. I don't mean anything towards gay folks, but that's where the power comes from. So I think for young people, it's helping them understand this is why those words become weapons, but also talking about, well, why do you feel the need to have to say those things? Where's that coming from? And what are the ways that we can kind of establish that I am somebody, I'm special, not at the expense of others? It's an important conversation to have. And I think it's really relevant and important now.
Why do you think it's relevant and important now? You do want to like expand on that and maybe even, you talked about empathy and the trust famine. Could you like maybe wrap all those pieces together?
Yeah, because like when we don't, like I think one of the things that accelerated all this is the pandemic, the period that we went through. Especially, I mean, it's true of anybody, right? You had older folks who were used to going to temple or mosque or synagogue or church, and that's where they would socialize with people, or they went to work. That was cut off, right? For young kids, think about young kids who were robbed of their experience of high school or middle school, right? They would talk to each other through screens, and that's what they started doing all the time anyway, right? Where they're used to like FaceTiming, and like, you watch young people, it's true, people of any age, to be honest, but you'd FaceTime and the person's not even on the screen. It's just like they put the phone on, the phone staring at the ceiling, and they're eating something and they're talking to each other, and so you lose that in-person experience, recognizing and valuing there's a human being I'm talking to. And then you spend all your time online and you see how comment threads disintegrated into like devaluing other people, like devaluing opinions or perspective, not being able to talk and see each other. So being able to like empathize and understand what people are going through, that started to erode too, right? Because empathy is that bridge. For me, empathy is a bridge from awareness to taking action, right? So like there's an anonymous quote I love. It says, compassion without action is just observation, right? Like I can be aware of what's going on, but unless I'm taking action, I'm aware of stats and figures. So compassion is like, awareness is like, okay, I'm aware of what you're going through, but empathy is like, I get how that makes you feel, how you feel left out. Like you're the new kid in school and you are different. Like maybe you color your hair, or maybe you're a person of color, or maybe you're, one of the few young, men of color here, or young women of color. Or you're not a traditional like gender norm that we know. You're someone different. So this whole thing, this idea of like, rather than trying to understand what that experience is like, there's less and less empathy out there. So it's not understanding how that makes them feel, what that's like. And that leads to the divides we have right now. And people are kind of like retreating to their corners and their teams, if you will. So I think that plays a big role in it. And we're seeing that in, through online culture, the way we navigate spaces, how people don't really value each other, don't look at it as a conversation of us. It's us versus them. And that's young people. That's, we always talk about, back in the day, we would say things like, oh, this next generation is the generation of hope, this is the generation of the future. And it's like, young kids, I remember back in the day, would be like, no, man, my generation sucks. Like people are just as hurtful and harmful my age as any age, right? So there's work to be done. And I think that we're seeing it now. Like a lot of the folks that spread incredible, powerful, progressive messages are young people. Young people rip a 30-second TikTok and do a better job than I would take an hour in a talk to identify an issue. But that flips the other way. So you have young people who are spreading hate and hateful messaging in a 30-second clip, that's more digestible. So language, communicating, the way we talk to each other is a big piece of this. And it's tough. It's tough because, you know, it's not a unique to one group of people, but there's a unique conversation around young people today, and recognizing why it feels like online there is more, you want to say, virtual abuse, online abuse, in the ways that we talk to each other. And we need more examples, and there are many out there, but it can be hard to find, of people who are pushing back on that, or pushing back on these things. So yeah, it's not that I don't, and it's not that it's necessarily this is a more hateful era than any other era. It's just that everything is surfaced. People feel more permission to be openly however they are, whatever that is, right? So you could feel more empowered to speak out about trans rights. You could feel more empowered to speak out and be openly transphobic. It's a lot that we have to try to wrap our heads around, as far as how do we kind of, touch grass and like see each other, and recognize each other.
I mean, you had brought it up, but I really want to talk about this shift. You know, a lot of boys, and I'm going to use an example here, like my little brother hit puberty just around the time that COVID happened. So those formative years that normally are spent schoolyard playing with friends, whatever young boys do, was spent instead online. And
Yeah.
he'd spent a good part of his formative life on TikTok, and it took about a month from this like brother that I had always known to all of a sudden he's talking about Andrew Tate. And I'm
Mm,
who's Andrew Tate? Who is, he's been brought, the algorithm has brought him into this like ultra conservative, hateful world. And thankfully now that he's, growing into a young man, he's, have opinions and thoughts for himself, and he's pulled out of that. But it's one thing I've noticed. I mean, my partner as well, who's his whole career is in mental health, he, admitted that when he hit puberty, he had the same thing, this like almost feeling insecure in himself, and world's changing, brain's changing, and he, young boys tend to just gravitate towards this system where they feel powerful by putting other people down. And, I think social media, we have access now to millions of people's thoughts and opinions at the tip of our fingers. And, like you were mentioning, it's a double-edged sword, but, can you talk on like how social media, is affecting young prepubescent boys and launching them into this world with, this insane access to information that, for better or for worse.
Yeah, it's I mean, when we talk about folks like Tate, and we talk about him so much, but he's just one of many, because there are many other online influencers. Like if you are, and there are many on ramps into that way of thinking. What I mean by that is like, like kind of like, if it's like, imagine like you're walking down the street and there's storefronts, and there's stores that, like Andrew Tate is a store, and just like there used to be a podcast, these two guys, Fresh and Fit, and there are other folks, right, easily accessible, whether you're into, video games, if you're into fitness, working out, you'd look up those videos and you'd quickly find their content, or folks like that, a similar mindset. And not just young kids, it's also adults of different ages and demographics and groups as well. And I think part of the challenge is like, as we are navigating this period of like technology and social media and conversation around isolation, and the pandemic accelerated all that, our social literacy, social anxiety really started to develop with a lot of young people and grown people too. That issue of connection became massive. I need to connect and feel connected. And there aren't as many on ramps into progressive spaces. I mean, like, you might name, if you were to name back in the day, not even that long ago, like name some progressive men, people might say Barack Obama or Justin Trudeau, right? They'd say like men who are openly feminist or whatever it is. But fast forward to 2025, it's hard to really name those on ramps into progressive thinking. Whereas the manosphere, male supremacy, white supremacy, there's so many ways to get into those cultures, and they're very inviting. I mean, whether it's Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or a lot of these different kinds of voices that kind of, they're talking about working out, or talking about fitness, or talking about just drugs, or just talking about cars, muscles, cool shit. And then all of a sudden it goes into this other thing, right? And that's part of the challenge, is creating spaces where young people can feel connection and feel community and belonging, where it's not at the expense of somebody else. Because the idea is like, you find this community online, and they kind of tell you, here's how to, you're having troubles in life, you're feeling isolated, you're not getting girls, you're not getting laid, you're not popular, you don't feel special. Back in the day, what that was on campuses, for example, it would be men's rights groups that would say, yeah, and that's because of feminism. But now that's online, and that's these influencers, right? And it's not just the big names, it's a lot of folks creating that content. So what they're doing is teaching you, like, when you're looking for answers, role models, solutions, community, they're providing it. Here's the way to look, here's the way to make $1 million, here's how to drive a Lambo before you hit 20, here's how to this and that. So they're giving you not just an identity, but also who to hate. And we align each other, our communities, based on who we exclude or who we look down on. And I build my power at the expense of these people, because, and they villainize them, right? Like, these are the ones who are holding you back. It's all these progressive folks, it's women and the alphabet soup, trans, whatever they'll say. And so, yeah, it's an appealing message, because on the surface, the message is, what we're offering you is freedom. We're offering you freedom to be a man again and to be a young dude. It's okay. You don't have to watch your language. It's not so tense. And there's a truth there in that it's not a very inviting message when the perception is that we're like being very restrictive, right? they'll point, look, they're being restricted. They don't want you to have fun. You have to use pronouns. You have to be careful what you say. You can't tell a joke anymore. Everything feels very tense, right? We're just like, take it, it's all good, just like relax and be yourself. But the reality is that it's a bait and switch, because they sell you freedom, but when they pull you into the movement, it's restraint. It's, you have to act a certain way. You got to, there's the only way to be a man. You can't act like this. You can't look like this. That's weak. That's soft, right? Versus our movements, on the surface it seems like we're being restrictive, but we're actually allowing you to be who you are. We're giving you the permission to have the freedom to be who you are. A man is a multitude. You can be all kinds of things. You can be into working out and cars, and you can also be able to say to your guy friends, I love you, right? It's you can be into whatever culture subculture you're into, but you can still have your emotional literacy. You build your emotional muscle. But those spaces tell you the opposite. But on the beginning, at the front, it looks good. Like, this is how you get laid. This is how you impress people. This is how you make people afraid of you. But then when you get into it, you realize, oh, I'm just still messed up, because you don't have any real sense of self, who you are, and you're denying half of your humanity. So yeah, it's hard when the quick we develop a culture of like, I want what I want and I want it now. Hit a button, I expect my thing. I want to look like this right now. I want to be uh successful. I want to be a millionaire, a billionaire right now. And the reality is, all these things take work, they take time. You have to build a life. And that could be building not just, acquiring wealth or status, it's building connections, friendships, a relationship. Those things are built through building trust, through developing empathy, right? And they're so critical. Like, those are critical components. But that's what we're up against. It's like the hard sell is like, this is going to take time, but it's the reality of like building an identity. And the problem is, like, young kids now, through social media, they see these ideas of success and they're like, oh, I got to be that at 14. I got to be that at 16. I'm 18. I'm already, like, my life is over. I'm single and I don't have an income. And it's like, you're just starting your life. Like, you have there's a whole world open to you. But it's hard to say that to a young kid who's like, yeah, but all I see is this. I don't know what you're talking about, you know? So it's helping people recognize, like, to recognize when you're being manipulated, to develop that literacy. But it's not easy. And it means developing trust. And like, part of that is being invested in these young men and boys. Like, I'm not here to tell you to be better to somebody else. I'm here to tell you to be better to yourself. And like, it's about you, and we care about you, and we want to actually build real community with you and connection. But that means we have to do that work, and we could do a much better job around that.
So I'm curious, have you in your work with boys again in particular experienced any breakthroughs? Like, you've been working with, a young man or a group of young men, um, and you've been able to like get through to them, you know, how does that happen? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's, what, like, I'll tell you that unfortunately my work is, a lot of it is one and done, whereas I'm brought in to, like, they'll bring me in to speak to an organization or a club or a team or a classroom or a school or a campus, and I do the talk, and that's it. What I'm really happy and really thankful for is when there is some continuous, like, it's more than one session or it's more than one gathering. But even within those moments, I've had experiences where I've had young, people reach out to me through social media later on and be like, I saw you do a talk a couple years ago. You came to my class, you came to my space, you know. um, I did a talk earlier this year at elementary school. There was a young boy who, I mean, elementary school, he pulled out a knife to impress people, and he pulled it out when he was talking to a group of young girls. And he went through the process of what you go through with that, when it's reported to the authorities and all that. Later on, I came to the school to do a talk, and the educators let me know that that student was in the room, and this is the history. And it's not to focus on that one student. There's all kinds of issues in the space, right? Just like any space. But at the end of that, my talk, the young dude came up to me and shook my hand, And that kind of made me feel like, okay, I connected with this person. Like a young person's approval is everything, right? If a young person thinks you're cool, like, okay, all right, right. And that's true, like of a person of any age. If a young person is like, hey, like appreciate you, or like thank you, like look you in the eye, shake your hand, give you a pound, like that's huge, right? And so I think building connection, the challenge is like it's not there's no formula to it. Like you get an opportunity to plant a seed with someone, it might take root and bloom like that. It might be something that takes years, like the words you say, but not even just what you say, it's how you carry yourself. It's not just like me saying the right thing, it's like the way I treated you with respect. Like even though we disagreed on an issue, I looked you in the eye, I shook your hand, I was like, I empathize with you. I was concerned about you. I showed that I cared. I listened to you. Big one. I listened to you. That will stay with someone where they might be like, huh. So it could be like, like, oh, I thought feminists were a certain way, or I thought woke people were a certain way, but this person actually cared about me. This person actually like listened to me and seemed to care about men or care about me. And that will stick with them. And so to me, it's like, I think we plant seeds, we have the opportunity to plant seeds, and that happens throughout everyday life. But the problem is that we're trying to force these seeds, right? It's like if you're gardening, you got to loosen up the soil, you got to nurture the soil, and then the seeds will take root. We try to push these conversations on people. And so it's like the soil becomes like dry, dead soil, right? Like they feel like, oh, you don't care about me. You're like you're pushing these issues on me, and like you care about other people. So now you're trying to plant these seeds, like use pronouns, respect people, respect women, and it doesn't stick. And that could be if you're having a relationship with someone over years, a talk, a training, whatever it is. But if you create an environment where the soil is like nurtured, meaning you named attention, you help them feel like I care about you, I'm invested in you, I acknowledge your humanity, right? That's when they kind of drop their shoulders and they kind of feel like, okay, let me listen. And they feel permission amongst their peers. That's the most important. Like to me, what I do means little to nothing. It's the impact that people have on each other, right? Like I can come and do a talk at a school or with a community, it's one thing, but it's when people see it at the house party or in the hallways at school or where in their neighborhood, that's where there's real impact. It's like, oh, okay, if you're into this, then I'm into it too. And that can be like, the class clown at school in this conversation is invested in listening. Everyone goes, whoa, okay, if Jeff's listening, then I'm going to listen too. So I think it's recognizing that whatever you do has impact and value. You might not see the fruits of your hard work, but it's just trusting that, like, if I'm giving people examples, like I describe it as models of possibility, like there's a possibility that this could look different, right? And I'm giving you examples of it. And hopefully you plant a seed and it sticks. And I think we all do that. It's recognizing that in your daily life, people are watching you and you have an impact whether you know it or not, right? We all have an impact. And the way we carry ourselves speaks more than like sometimes the words we share. So yeah.
I'm taking the pin out now and I want to talk about that talk. Um, you had mentioned one thing, I'd written it down, but you were talking about Tupac and you're comparing as, him at 17 versus when he died at 25. And in doing so, you talked about the point of no return.
Mm.
What does that mean? Can you explain that for our listeners?
Yeah. So like, when you think about, so the example is like back in the day, I used to show a clip of Tupac Shakur when he was 17, before he was the rap superstar, Hollywood actor, all these different things, whatever you think of him, right? You might think of him as the kind of fierce street poet. You might think of him as a brash, obnoxious punk thug, right? Whatever you think of him. And for a lot of people, he's like a legendary hip hop MC and all these things. But back in those days, he was just like a 17-year-old kid from Oakland. And he was talking in an interview about young women and how boys in the neighborhood would, the way they chat to young girls and try to pick them up. And for him, he was like, I just want to show them class and like be respectful. And they might laugh at me and say, I'm being too nice. But I know that, like we were talking about, I know that, one day they'll see the light, they'll see that this is better, and that's just what I'm trying to do. And And hearing him in that interview is really impressive, you know. And you could argue and have a conversation about whether or not Tupac changed between 17 and 25, but the life he was living, the subcultures, the community he was in, the spaces he was in, that eventually took his life, you know. And we can have a conversation about systems and systemic issues for young Black men, and there's a variety of important factors. But the reality is that Tupac was trying to fight against this culture, and that culture eventually took him, you know. And the culture meaning a language of violence, of expressing, handling problems through violence. And so for young men and boys in your life, you know, we're on this journey and you crisscross with them, whether it's your child or someone in the neighborhood, someone that, you know, in your building, apartment building, someone in your community. And there are these windows of opportunity where you can plant that seed and whatever and make an impact, positive or negative. But the question is, what is that point where in a young person's life they reach a point of no return? Is there such a thing? Is there a point where they're a lost cause, right? I don't believe that anyone is a lost cause, but you have to choose your battles. Sometimes, like, there might be a person in your life, it might be a family member, where you tried to work with them and it's becoming so harmful for you. Like, you have to take care of your health and well being, right? You have to choose your battles. But someone out there can make an impact with them. So maybe a friend in their life might make an impact with them to change their ways. Um, so when I showed that clip, I talk about how here he is at 17, but at 25, you know, his life was ended, right? So the question is, at what point did his life really end? And for the young men and boys in our lives, being more, you know, urgent around how can I help them before they reach a point where they're past listening to what you have to say. They've doubled down on a perspective, a lifestyle, or a view that is just leaving them with one end, you know, end route for them. There's only one path. And it's a hard thing to think about, because you think that, you know, you think of life and life feels infinite, but there are only so many opportunities that we have to plant those seeds with each other. um but yeah, Tupac, I think, is an example of someone who, he should still be alive today, and we should have seen all the different chapters of what he, like, his growth. And either maybe he stopped, um you know, being an MC and became a community leader and organizer, or maybe he's still putting out records today and making movies, or doing both, right? All those things, being a leader to the community and being an artist. But we're robbed of that. And how many, not just young men, but how many people have we lost? Like, you think of the Black community, think of Indigenous lives all across, you know, the land we call Canada and the States and beyond. How many lives we've lost to violence. And again, it's not just unique to men, but there is a conversation that we need to have together about how we can encourage them to value the humanity of others. We got to value their humanity. That means valuing themselves. Like, my life, I am of value. I'm not disposable. I'm not you know, a pawn in the game. I am someone of value. My life means something, and then I can value other people's lives. But it's tough. It's tough because it's very romantic to kind of think of someone being, you know, just, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want to do. um but you can be that driven and that assertive, but in a way that is helpful, not just for you but for our communities.
Yeah, there's so many things coming to mind for me right now. You talk about culture, and how the culture got him, meaning Tupac.
Mm,
And I think in many ways, a lot of this conversation has directly or indirectly been in reference to culture and the ways in which culture influences all of us, but young men in particular.
mhm.
Why are so many young men falling into this trap? And what is it about the culture? And how do we change it? I know those are big questions. I'm
Mhm.
assuming you think about this stuff, a lot. So maybe you could give us some insight.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think, again, like, it comes to this idea of when you feel disconnected, you feel devalued. You don't devalue anyone else. And so creating this, creating connection, creating on ramps into communities where you can feel that you belong, that you're part of something, because like you have the young men who are trying to find worth, value, and purpose. Like, like right now, you have young men who coming through the pandemic, you have young men who find their purpose like in the war, like they feel there's a gender war, right? And it's like they feel like men are under attack. And so their purpose is in joining that war and fighting feminism or fighting social change, fighting woke culture, right? But it's I think it's recognizing that like, we can build community in a way that isn't at our expense, that we can build community together and learn to value one another. And it's tough because I'm not gonna lie to you, like it's so much easier to find voices that are saying, no, like you gotta look out for yourself. You gotta look out for you. This is a dog eat dog world and all these different things, right? So finding community is tough for young men because they feel like no one's looking out for me. What about my challenges? Like when the Me Too movement started to really proliferate, it was a great way for these voices to take men in because young men and boys experience abuse as well. And it's not that the Me Too movement was exclusive of that. Like it was about abuse of anybody. Like for example, actor Terry Crews talked about experiencing harm. And the challenge is like we talked about vulnerability feeling like a threat. So for men to express vulnerability is tough on an everyday level. For men to talk about being a survivor of sexual assault, most men will go to their grave not telling a soul, not a therapist, not their wife or husband or partner, nobody, right? So that's the extreme example of it. But this idea of, you know, someone described it as the men to backlash to Me Too, where it's like, what about men? What about us? And it's I think it's important for our progressive movements to be like, yes, we care about those issues too. Women getting theirs, trans rights or human rights is not at the expense of cis hetero guys and boys. But y'all have conversation, y'all have need to do some work, but we also care about you too, right? Just like all of us need to get some work, do that work and do some emotional heavy lifting around these conversations. And I think that what's appealing is to look out the window and blame other people. What's tough is to look in the mirror and say, well, am I part of the problem here? What could I do differently? And it's not even like it's not a blame or shame, right? It's just about saying, well, where's my responsibility here? Where do I need to be accountable to myself? Because I think that the relationship we have with others, the foundation is the relationship we have with ourselves, with myself. So that foundation of how I'm in relationship with myself, how do I talk to myself? How do I treat myself? How do I take care of myself? And I'm doing that. I'm working on that too. I think we all are. The problem is like, don't think that there are people who are perfect and you're just a loser. It's like we're all trying to figure that out. But when you get into this thing of recognizing you're not alone, and there are other men like yourself, there are folks like Abigail, people who care and are concerned, and you're not alone, then you start to feel this community. But if you're going to the mindset of no one's looking out for me, no one knows what I'm going through, forget everybody, and I'm just looking out for me, you're gonna fulfill that, right? It's like if you think you're alone, okay, well, you're gonna be alone because you're not trying to build bridges to other people. So again, it's like building that emotional muscle means doing the hard work yourself, but then also recognizing self-care doesn't mean doing it by yourself, right? It's building community. So if you think of building emotional muscle, to kind of really dive into what we're talking about here, building emotional muscle is like going to the gym, right? So just like you'd go to the gym and work out physically, you can work out emotionally. And a guy might go to the gym with the boys and work out his physical muscle. You can work out emotionally with the guys in your life, talk about things, build community, and actually recognize, oh, they're going through what I'm going through too. And they feel like, oh my goodness, I'm so happy we can talk about this because I've been struggling with it too. And that could be dating, that could be pressures that you're feeling whatever it is, especially like, for racialized youth, challenges around racism or other kind of forms of oppression as well. And then when you do that, you can, like, when you're building physical muscle, you might get a trainer, a personal trainer. Emotional muscle is getting a therapist to help you build an emotional muscle, doing that work, right? And it's recognizing it doesn't happen overnight. You don't expect that you're going to run a marathon overnight. You're not going to get jacked overnight. Same thing emotionally. We can do that work. And that's where we can spot each other. Like, you build emotional muscle, like physical muscle. You spot each other, you look out for each other. And that's what building community looks like, right? Because we rely, as guys, we rely on the women in our lives primarily to be our mothers, right? Not just our actual mother, but how many women can relate to, I have to mother so many men in my life? Like, if they're going through trouble at work or school or relationships, they'll come to me, right? And it's like, well, why can't we come to the other guys in our life? Like, let's take that emotional heavy lifting. Let's work out with each other. Let's talk about it. Like, I can spot my male friends, my brothers, the men in my life I love and care about, you know, um, at work or friendships and family, all that. And so again, like, when you get off that island and realize that I want community, I have to build it. I can't just expect it to come to me, right? And that's where that nurturance comes in. And that's where, again, I keep saying it, like, I've learned to build emotional muscle through these ways. So I'm going to do that moving into the stage of my life. And it's learning from absolutely women and gender expansive people in our lives. They want to do that work with us, but it's like, we can't do all the work. We're here to support you. We'll spot you too, but you got to do that heavy lifting. You got to start and do it, and then we'll support you. And there are young men and boys and men who are doing that work, but they can't find community. And I think part of that is, like, if we give each other permission to be like, you know what, it's cool to flex that emotional muscle, to build emotional literacy, and accept it, because I also need to do it as well. That's step by step, but these things won't happen overnight. We need more models, more examples of it. And that's where we come in together and do that work together.
I mean, you took the question out of my mouth. I was going to ask, like, what would you even say to someone who's, learning or, unlearning all this different relationships with masculinity and socialized gender and, using that emotional muscle. But I mean, I'm looking at the time, and as we wrap up our episode, I have a notes app full of notes that I jotted down and story or points I wanted to hit. But, we like to ask a sort of a golden question at the end of each episode. And, as we've gone on this journey together the past hour, learning and unlearning and,
Mm,
going through these different experiences together and having all of our perspectives combined on this issue that affects everyone on this call and everyone listening. Um, in your years, in your community building work and your advocacy work, what's one lesson that you wish you could go back and tell your younger self?
yeah, I think one of the biggest things is, like, when we're talking about men and young men, it's true of everybody. Like, there's messages like, you're not enough, do better, be better. Like, and I think when young men think, like, I don't have a six pack, I don't have money, I don't have fresh kicks, I don't have all these things, and then people like me come along and, like, respect women, don't rape, be a better dude, be respectful, do better, be better. It all feels like, oh, it's I'm under attack, I'm under attack. And I think the thing to kind of recognize is, like, being, as a man, as a young man, doing better, being better. The problem is also, we see everything as guys like competition. Like, oh, like, why can't you be more like your brother so and so, or why can't you be like this guy? And we look at other men as like competition. I know it's true of everybody, but again, because of the uniqueness of how we create identity as guys, that's the uniqueness of it, right? So it's like, it's not about being better than other men, it's about being better than your yesterdays. That's the message to me. It's like being better than the guy I was yesterday, being better, like learning from the mistakes. I fell short. I need to work on this. Here's where I want to improve, but I'm doing good in this. I'm doing better in this. People care about me. I am good at doing these things. I have built my emotional muscle around these things, and it's seeing I'm growing. It's a journey, it's a process. And people don't want to hear it because they want to be like, give me the answer right now. And people are more tuned to the quick fix than, like, the actual solution. But the reality is, like, when you think of it, that mindset is like, I'm trying to do better, be better than the person I was yesterday. That applies to, like, whether it's you're trying to practice your shot in basketball, whether it's in your career, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in, the way I'm a better son or partner or, husband or lover or friend or colleague or, partner in my community, like all these different things. It's like, that's the message to me, is like recognizing that rather than judging yourself, it's measuring, okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to go and grow, finding examples of it, but it's not a competition with other dudes. It's just that you're trying to grow as an individual. So doing better than your yesterdays, I think, is the thing for me.
Love that. I love that. And I got so much I want to ask too, but I mean,
I
Yeah.
know.
we're wrapping up. So I just want to say, Jeff, man, you've given us a lot to chew on, for sure. I'm definitely gonna, like, I mean, I got kids, boys actually, so I mean,
Mm.
so like it's a lot for me to chew on as a parent. And
How
then
old are they?
so I got a 3-year-old and a 17-year-old, man. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so
Okay.
it's
Beautiful.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, it's been a challenge sometimes, especially with the older one, right? And then with the younger
Mm-hmm.
one, you sort of see certain things already occurring,
Mm.
and it's
Mm.
like, how do we, people say combat that or interrupt that. And for me, I think about it, you used the word before, expansive, in a different context, but you're using it. So for me, it's about how do we like expand the perception of identity and what that can mean for him. Um, but yeah, I just really want to say thank you for, giving us so much
Yeah.
this thing. And it's very apparent why, you've been so successful doing the work that you do, because I mean, a lot of, man, a lot of like thoughts that really make you think, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
I appreciate you both. I appreciate the listeners and the conversation, and keep the conversation going. I mean, these are things we'll talk about with your next guests, and listeners can, continue these conversations with the people in their lives as well. Absolutely. Much love. Yeah, appreciate it.
100%. Yeah, thank you again. It's been an awesome conversation, and I think back to how much, classmates that I had growing up would have needed someone like you to come into the class and just, interrupt the I keep using insanity, but the noise online that can just
Mm.
corrupt anyone's brain, and, having someone that's just like a drop of clarity in the water it can make all the difference. So, thank you.
Mm. Thank you.